skills and the design, everything they need to know, so they can independently or as a group build a wind turbine. And the idea is that you do that for a few weeks, maybe you give them a little bit of money to help them get started, but you help local people create a business. And then that business is to build a wind turbine and sell it to someone in the community or outside for a bit of a profit, and then suddenly you've created the business out of it. And again, it creates jobs, stimulates the local economy, and helps provide electricity to regions that don't have it. The only downside is that if you couldn't afford a wind turbine, like a lot of communities in the mountains, you're still not going to be able to afford one, so you still need someone to help you out. But it's a good way of starting small businesses and letting them grow from teaching someone new skills. There's a lot of unemployment in a lot of developing countries, so also it creates new jobs in hopefully what is a potentially large industry, or it's got a big future anyway. There's just some photos of people in Mozambique building the turbine. So the guy that runs this NGO went to Mozambique, where he has family, and taught a bunch of people how to build the wind turbine, helped them create a business, and then they're now selling these wind turbines to local people for profit. And there's a handful of people that now have jobs in this new industry. Other than the NGOs that I mentioned, there's a lot of other NGOs around the world that are using these home-built cubic wind turbines for those different types of projects. All around the world, every continent, they're either using them for volunteer projects, capacity building, selling them for profit for businesses, or they're training people, they're doing workshops. And in February this year, they all came together. They used to work independently. The only link was buying, I guess, the recipe book from Hugh Biggett on his website and asking him a few questions if you ever got stuck. So they all came together in February and created an association called Wind Empowerment. And there's today 27 members, and they're operating in 20 countries around the world. And the idea is that they unite, they share ideas, they share problems, they share technology, they talk to each other. If someone has a design that works better, they can share it with everyone else. Basically trying to, rather than work independently and go at it and all suffer the same problems, each experiencing the same thing over and over again and overcoming it, that they all work together, and united they can hopefully, or they should, get a lot more done than if they work on their own. I think naturally NGOs, surprisingly maybe, are very competitive. It's their nature not to want to share their ideas or share what they've achieved, which is a shame because normally it's their mission to help as many people as possible. So keeping it secluded to your own country is a bit stupid. But it's already starting to work out well. So Windaid was based in Peru and is now in Argentina as well. And there's a few other NGOs, mainly around South America and Africa, that work with rural electrification. And they can share ideas for funding, ideas for volunteer projects, how you might manage a project, things like that. Whereas the ones in Britain, Europe, USA are more workshops, but they have a lot to share on the technology. So they're doing research that they can filter down to the developing countries, because people in developing countries don't have the resources and the funding or the skills or the education to do it themselves.
So, question. That's an interesting map. But I mean, these are the countries there. Do you mind flipping back for a second? Do you mind if I ask a question now? Is it going to throw your presentation off?
No, that's okay.
I'm just looking like there's nothing in South Africa, at least not with the wind empowerment.
No.
And then or Australia, or don't know about New Zealand or Canada. I mean, it's kind of strange, isn't it? I mean, there's quite a few people involved in NGOs. Are they involved in like sort of a rival?
No, it's now
NGOs. Or?
No, when Wind Empowerment started in February, about 17 organisations participated.
Oh, it's just since February.
Yeah, just this February this year. And they were ones that showed the most interest in participating and sharing. Actually, an NGO that works in Tanzania and Mali is planning on doing one in South Africa and in Mexico. There's another map, or there's another list of people that are building these wind turbines, not necessarily for projects, but they're building them. And that map would cover 3 times as many countries. But in terms of NGOs and organisations that are running workshops and running projects for electrification, that's how many there are, and that's pretty much everyone in the world that's doing it. So they've tried to include everybody that's doing it in the world, and if they're interested in joining or not, at least they're on the radar and people know they exist, so you can sort of help out where possible. And I'd say in the last 5 or 6 years have a lot more sprung up. Has the Hugh Bigot wind turbine been more commonly used and people thought we can do this. So I'd say in the next few years that a lot more countries would work. But you have to remember that not everywhere is practical for wind energy. So if you look at a wind map, a lot of the Sahara Desert and this part of West Africa, there's just no wind. So it'd be stupid to start a wind turbine NGO in a region where there's no wind. And other countries just don't need it. So Australia is a developed country. Okay, they don't have as much electricity, but there's probably not as much of a demand or interest in starting an NGO in Australia to help people with no electricity. Maybe someone that lives on a farm might want to build their own, and they can contact you bigger in Scotland and get the details, but maybe in time more people will pop up and show their face and say, we're doing this, can we get involved? So the map should grow. So I'm going to quickly talk about how the projects are run. It's not a case of volunteer or build a wind turbine, turn up to any old community and install it and job done. There's a lot more involved than just that. And the first stage is the project initiation and design. So we already know that we have the technology of wind turbines and that's what we're going to be doing. So that's kind of where you start. The first thing we ever did when I started the volunteer projects in Peru 2 years ago was we knew there was communities with no electricity and we knew there were people in need of it, but we didn't know where they were. So we had to try and find them, which is actually more difficult than it sounds. We contacted local NGOs, international NGOs, asked friends if they knew of communities, maybe they have families that live in the mountains. All these different ways to try and find a list of all these communities that we know of that would benefit from getting a wind turbine. And where possible, we would call them an intermediate contact. Someone that you can talk to that has access to a phone or email that also knows the community. And in that lies a lot of benefits. You could technically walk up to a community and just introduce yourself and say, you guys have no electricity, I have a wind turbine, let's talk. But in reality, you probably wouldn't get a very successful project at the end of it. So you want to have contact with somebody that already knows a community or knows communities that are well organised, that is reliable in terms of passing information and collecting it. And that will make the project a lot easier for you. Peru, for example, is a huge country. So in reality, it's difficult to travel around and get in touch with everyone. If you have people that you can help do your work, then it makes life a lot easier. And one thing that probably needs to be said is that there's no point putting a wind turbine in a region that has no wind. It sounds a bit stupid and sounds obvious, but you'd be amazed at how many people put wind turbines where they think there's a need for electricity and they think it might work, and then a few years down the line they realise that it's not really doing much and it was a waste of time. Without being horrible to an organisation, Blue Energy in Nicaragua have been around for about 8 years, and they started with wind technology and they've only just stopped doing wind projects because they've realised that there's just no wind along the coast of Nicaragua. They're still doing research and they're really good at it and they're a very well organised NGO, but this is a good example of knowing what technology works best in a region. There were a lot of places we went to in Peru that you want to help them because they have no electricity and you know it will make a difference, but you know that the wind turbine's not going to generate much electricity, so it's a complete waste of your time. Even though you want to help, you can't, which is hard to deal with sometimes, but you have to face the facts. Another thing is, and this is probably more of a reality of working for an NGO with no money, is that you have to find ways of doing feasibility studies. And with that, wind maps are the best way to check the wind conditions. You could install anemometers in every community you think might work, but when you're looking at 30 or 40 communities, and an anemometer costs $200 each, that adds up to a lot of money just to check out a community. So using a wind map is a very cheap way of estimating what the wind conditions are like. And in choosing communities, whether you consider them or not, once you've been made aware of them, the first step is making sure they have good enough wind to make it a viable project. Only when we've used the wind map and we've determined whether there's wind would we visit a community to then explore having a project. If we get the location of a community and it says there's no wind, we just respond saying, sorry, but there's nothing we can do, it wouldn't work. You can also ask the community whether there's wind in their region, and it's very difficult for a person to judge the wind speeds, but it is a good identification of maybe whether there's wind in the morning or the afternoon, or whether it's seasonal. And it has some part to play on a decision, but if there's no wind on the wind map and they say there's loads, you're going to generally go with the wind map over them. If the wind map shows wind and the community says lots of wind, then there's a good chance that there's enough wind to make the project work. And the last thing is that when a community was made aware to us and we put location in the wind map and the wind map says it's got 4.5 meters per second average wind speeds or more, that community would be considered for a project. We wouldn't choose one community over another because it had more wind than the other. Both of them have enough wind, so we wouldn't go into details of doing wind studies or anything like that. If they have wind, then we'll run a project with them if it's plausible, no matter how much. So if the community had really strong winds, 9 meters per second or something really impressive, they wouldn't necessarily get chosen over a community that had the bare minimum, because a lot more factors are involved than just wind. Basically we get to a point where we say they've got enough wind, they're in, or they don't have enough wind, and that's kind of the first cut-off point.
Have you got any names for databases or wind maps?
The photo I showed there is called 3-tier. It has a free service and it's mapped around the world. You can also pay and you get a few more inputs of data.
Right.
That's the one we used.
3-tier.
There's lots of others. You have to remember that they're based on estimates and calculations and they're not entirely accurate all the time. But when you haven't got many resources, it's hard to get into a region. It's what you have to go with.
Totally.
Sometimes you might cut off communities that might have worked, or sometimes you might include some that are borderline, but that's just what you have to go with. And if the community's got wind according to the map, we'd arrange a site visit. And visiting the community, visiting the people, visiting the landscape and the environment, you can learn a lot more about whether you think the project's going to work and how it's going to make a difference. When we go, this photo is Hanan in the white hat. He's an Israeli volunteer just showing them what an anemometer is, how it works. We basically just talk to the community about the project and gather data so we can decide whether it's going to work or not. The first question is not entirely redundant, asking the community whether they're interested. Most people would say yes. If you offer them electricity and they don't have it, they're going to say yes. But only once we've told them exactly how the project works, what their participation involves, everything like that, we need them to be on board. You can't force the community to have it, you need them to want it. You can also check whether it's going to work for a wind turbine. The wind map might say yes, but when you get there might be no wind. The NGO might have put the community in the wrong place on the map, so you take the wrong reading. Lots of things can happen until you get there and you see for yourself. You don't know what it's like. You also want to find out what the community wants the electricity for. Do they want to play computer games? Do they want to have heaters so they're not cold at night? Do they want to have manufacturing equipment so they can start a business? Do they want lights, computers? You have to take on board what they want to use electricity for. It's not always the same thing. Maybe it's for a water pump rather than for the school or for a health post. And getting their involvement, again, means that the community's on board and it's going to be a lot more successful. That said, you don't always take communities' needs on board. Almost every community in the mountain wants electricity for heating because it's so cold at night and in the morning. But if you have a heater, it's going to use a lot of electricity and these buildings are very poorly insulated. So actually, although that's what they want and a lot of them would say it's their first choice, you kind of have to be a bit responsible and say, it's not a good use of electricity and it's not going to do much difference, it's not going to help too much, better off having lights or something. Basically, between you, who are the experts in the community who know what they want, you have to work out what the electricity is going to be used for. And obviously we're always thinking how we're going to host volunteers there, because we find